Hi guys, it's Amity and welcome back to another video. Today we are doing another ranking video, but this time we are going through all of the Dead Space games. I've just finished playing through almost all of the Dead Space games earlier this year, so I figured it was a good opportunity to go through and talk about my favorite and my least favorite parts of this series. Firstly, I do want to mention a couple things before we get into the video. I am technically excluding two games from the lineup here, those being Dead Space Mobile and Dead Space Ignition. The mobile port was released back in 2011 and to my knowledge is no longer downloadable through the app stores. From what I've seen of it though, it did look like a decent mobile experience. Dead Space Ignition I've also excluded because it's kind of more of a visual novel with a couple puzzles thrown in than an actual video game, so I didn't really feel like it earned its place on the list. Secondly, these are of course just my personal opinions. I feel like this list isn't going to be super divisive, but I would still love to hear your thoughts and feelings on these games in the comments. Lastly, all of the footage shown throughout this video was taken from my very own gameplay over on my Twitch channel. If you're interested in checking out more horror gameplays from me live, consider chucking the channel a follow, the link is in my bio. Additionally, if you want to see the full videos of me playing through this series, it is found in my Dead Space playlist here on this channel, which I will link in the cards and in the description of this video. With all that out of the way, let's get into the rankings. First up, I think it's important to touch on the original 2008 game to get a bit of a baseline for the other entries going forward. The original Dead Space, created by Visceral Games, released in 2008 for the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and Windows PC. Now, I personally wasn't a part of the gaming scene during that time, however I can tell you that the horror genre was going through a bit of a shake-up here. Survival horror was being replaced with this new generation of action-fueled shooters like Call of Duty, Resident Evil 4, and Left 4 Dead. Third-person games were also getting a little bit harder to find, thanks to the rising popularity of the first-person perspective. Horror was taking a back seat, and the team at Visceral sought to try and bring back the slow-building horror atmosphere with their newest project. Bring in Dead Space. Not only did it do a marvelous job at combining some ass-clenching combat with nerve-wracking environmental design, but it innovated the third-person camera in a new and fresh way. It integrated the usual video gamey feeling HUD elements with in-game explanations that made everything feel right in its own universe. Our protagonist, Isaac Clarke, has his health status showing through a glowing meter on the back of his suit, his inventory is projected by a holographic image coming from his helmet, and his ammo count is displayed by a screen on the weapon itself. All of this helps make immersion the key factor in this game. Isaac, at the end of the day, is just a regular guy, an engineer sent in to explore the planet-cracking Ishimura and do a routine maintenance check, not knowing the horrors he was about to face. Mining tools are his only weapons, and healing items are found scarcely throughout the ship. Corridors are long, dark, quiet, and combine masterful sound design and lighting to make for a truly teeth-grinding experience. The gameplay is broken up into three main segments. The first is exploration. The Ishimura itself is fairly linear in design, but it pays to go off the beaten path when you can search for much needed ammo and health pickup items. The game does a great job at delivering these at just the right moments and seems to drop exactly what you were low on at the time. The second part is the puzzles. Of course, nothing is easy in this game and every seemingly simple path is going to be blocked by a broken generator or a locked door, and Isaac will need to solve the problem before he can proceed. Some are simple, like finding a battery to power an elevator, while others are more complicated, like aligning solar panels to correct a communication system. Either way, they're a nice break from the stressful environments, and they last just long enough to let your guard down for the third section, the combat. Mutated corpses called necromorphs are Isaac's biggest threat throughout the game. They don't appear often and are usually only found in small numbers, but their skill and variety can knock your health down in a flash. Unlike other shooter games, aiming for center of mass or a clean headshot isn't going to affect these guys very much. Instead, you must practice your accuracy by aiming for dismemberment, removing their limbs to stop them running at you, and removing their arms to stop them swinging. In fact, a headshot is likely to make them harder to deal with, as they will just flail wildly hoping to get a hit in on you. It's a tactic that no other game I'm familiar with really does, and it's one that set Dead Space apart from its other competing games. Of course, it does have its downsides though. Especially going back to the game now, the movement and controls do feel a little clunky at times. The zero gravity segments of the game especially just have you leaping from wall to wall, which actually gave me some minor motion sickness. And some sequences just seem to go on a little too long, like the infamous meteor shooting section or destroying the gravity tethers. But overall, it is a damn fine game and a must-play for anyone remotely interested in the survival horror genre. It spawned many other incredible sequels, however, it's not my personal favourite of the series. I would put the original Dead Space in second place. 3 years later, in 2011, a sequel to the first Dead Space graced our screens. Released on the same hardware as the first game, Dead Space 2 sought to take everything people loved about the first time, inject it with steroids, and throw it back in our faces. This game scaled everything up to 1,000. The action and combat were sharper, with more varieties of necromorphs to fight and in larger numbers. The horror atmosphere was more oppressive than ever, dealing with horrific hallucinations alongside everything else. And it all came together to form a nice little package, tying it all up with some sweet quality of life improvements to make it the perfect gift. Let's dive a little deeper though. Firstly, the enemies. Alongside the first game's assortment of slasher enemies, long-range lurkers, armored brutes, infectors, bloated pregnants, and agile leapers, come 3 new varieties. The first is the Acid Spitter. These guys act similarly to a regular slasher necromorph but can spit poisonous projectiles from across the room. Crawlers resemble little grey children and are often found in large groups. They're usually a one-hit kill but can quickly overwhelm the player if they're given the chance. And lastly are the Stalkers. I call these guys the Velociraptors. They hunt in packs of 3 or more and will hide around corners behind crates before quickly running at you. They prey on the fear of being watched and hunted, and hearing their chirping from a distance always made me sweat. All these new enemies take advantage of the additional environments nicely. Sometimes it really does feel like Dead Space 2 was just ticking off a checklist for most common horror locations in video games. We've got a hospital section with necromorphs strapped down to operating tables, a school filled with little crawlers and explosive babies, and plenty of sweet wall vents to crawl through. But it never felt like too much. The pacing of the game was actually quite well done. Action was definitely becoming more of a priority here though, over the survival aspects. Health and ammo are still in decent supply, but the rate at which combat sections appear increase dramatically. In fact, you face your first boss fight only around an hour into the campaign. The larger enemy count does raise the stakes though, and you're forced to rely on things like the stasis ability and kinesis a lot more just to survive. The game also introduced some much welcome quality of life improvements to the game that would carry over into all the future entries. Power nodes, used for unlocking doors and upgrading weapons, no longer take up valuable inventory space and instead have been assigned their own key item slot. Zero gravity segments are also much less stomach churning and now allow free flight movement rather than wall hopping. These, along with the generally more cleaned up feel of the game, all help make it an enjoyable experience to play. For me, Dead Space 2 sits at 3rd place. Due to the larger enemy count without much of an item reward increase meant that the difficulty can take steep turns at certain points, and especially near the endgame gave me quite a headache. Literally. Next in our list is Dead Space 3. This is where things start to take a bit of a downhill turn. Released in 2013, Dead Space 3 was battling with the decline of horror. Slow-paced, atmospheric games were out, and a new era of action-packed multiplayer shooters were in. EA figured it would be best to change the Dead Space formula to fit this new mold a little better, and the result was a fairly average game. Almost all the horror elements were scrapped in place of more and more combat. Every few steps you take has necromorphs thrown at you from every angle, and in a first for the series, people too. I would say the first 50% of the game has you fighting either regular people or zombified versions of themselves before you even see a true necromorph. Even the final few chapters of the game, you are still cover shooting at military guys. It all just feels a little out of place. Now, not to say any of it's bad, because it's not, but let's compare the first and the third games. The first hour of Dead Space 1 has you crash land your ship into the Ishimura and then spend the next few chapters skulking around the hallways, trying to avoid 1 or 2 necromorphs in the room beside you. Flash forward to Dead Space 3, in the first half an hour, I'm met with a good couple shooting sections, immediately followed by a rock climbing segment, followed by surviving a plane crash. It's just a lot happening at once, except now there's no little puzzle in between to help calm me down. What there is now, though, is these goddamn rock climbing sections. I'm not sure who thought these were a good idea, but they happen way too much. They're essentially Isaac very slowly climbing up a mountain, attempting to dodge the falling rocks and or necromorphs that are coming at you, which would be fine were it not for these agonizing controls. Maybe it's just me, but it honestly felt like trial and error if I was going to be able to jump out of the way, or if Isaac was just going to dangle there like a fish on a fishing line. Not to mention the hitbox. I just don't have enough fingers to count how many times I died because a rock that was like a solid arm's length away thought that it touched me. That aside, my main complaint with this game is that it just feels like 8 different games they smushed into one, but none of them were given enough time to bake. Many of the new features like the rock climbing, the cover shooting, the co-op campaign, and the crafting system all just feel shoved in for the sake of it without being given much thought. But here's where my other half of the argument comes in. Lots of these can be avoided. Not the gameplay ones, but the side stuff. The co-op campaign is optional. You do still have to deal with the partner in single player, but so many of the interactions between him and Isaac are cut out, he just might as well not be there. And the crafting system, it's cool on paper, being able to use different modules from different guns to customize their style, but I ended up just sticking to the classic plasma cutter loadout. It was a little too complicated for me, and on the lower difficulties, I just didn't feel like I needed to utilize it. One positive for the game, though, is the visuals. The necromorph designs do look grotesque and amazing, the few times we actually see them, and the bosses are fairly fun, but honestly I would have been happier if this game was even 2 hours shorter. It plays a little more open in design, having you backtrack between areas to access ones that were previously blocked, but again, it just doesn't feel finished. The last few chapters of the game especially are about 3 hours of going up the exact same elevator and the exact same hallways, doing what just equated to fetch quests before the final boss, which, by the way, had 3 rock climbing sections. Overall, I did enjoy my time with this game. I do still think it is a worthwhile play for a fan of the series, but I can't see myself going back and replaying it probably ever. It's 5th place for me. The next game I'm going to cover is Dead Space Extraction. This is another spin-off game like Ignition, but it follows much more closely to a regular Dead Space title, hence why I included it in the list. Dead Space Extraction released in 2009 for the Nintendo Wii, and it later got ported to the PlayStation 3. Extraction takes the place of a prequel, documenting the events that took place before the first game kicked off, as in the initial infection of the Ishimura. We even get to see certain characters like Nicole just going around doing their thing and play as one of the team members who helped transport the marker off Aegis 7. The game is an on-rails shooter, which is a hit-or-miss style for a lot of people. For me, I find them quite enjoyable. Think House of the Dead or Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles. It's a first-person perspective that has your character moving along a set path while you can look around to find hidden items and just focus on the shooting. They're fun, pretty short games that take some of the stress and pressure off of a usual horror shooter experience. I played the PS3 version using the regular DualShock controller and I found little issues. But if you have the PS3 Move Kit or you play on the Wii, you do get to use motion controls. It was 100% doable with a controller though, and it even has a sensitivity setting to make that a bit easier for you. One thing to note though, if you're using this strategy, third-party controllers don't work with this game thanks to some gyro features like shaking the controller to charge a flashlight, so I had to go out and source an official Sony controller to play this, but it was worth it. It's a short game, maybe 6-ish hours long, but if you're a fan of the Dead Space universe and its lore, it is super fun to see the events leading up to the infection of the Ishimura, and be in the shoes of someone who witnessed and kind of helped it happen. The combat itself was slightly stressful at times, but never did I feel actually overwhelmed by the enemies. You can find different weapons throughout the levels, each with their own primary and secondary fire modes, and find power-ups for them that carry over to the later levels too. So it definitely pays to keep a sharp eye out for the glowing objects in the background, because you only have a second or two to grab them sometimes. The game still keeps some slight puzzles in there too, with Zero Gravity making a return and some connect the dot style locks for doors, even a couple boss battles. Overall, it's actually a super fun game, and I recommend any fan of the series to check it out if you haven't already. You can find it fairly cheap as well, so there's really no reason not to play it. Extraction gets 4th place for me simply because I just don't think it can stand up to the more genuine survival horror of the first 2 entries. And the last game for us to cover is, of course, the Dead Space remake, releasing in 2023 for PC, PS5, and Xbox Series consoles. Now, right off the bat, this game is a first place spot for me. But why is that? Now, I would just like to make my opinion known here that to me, this is the standard every video game remake should be held to going forward. It's basically the exact same game we got in 2008, but with all the quality of life improvements from its sequels, with next-gen graphics, and even more character development and background story to fill in the gaps for the lore lovers. It's no secret that the original Dead Space looked fantastic, it even holds up to today's standards, but putting these two side by side is just unfair. The remake looks and sounds amazing and is definitely taking advantage of that next-gen hardware. The game is literally the perfect remake, not only visually but technically. It speaks for itself that I could walk into a new room or a hallway and immediately remember what was going to happen, but it still managed to surprise and scare me. The Ishimura is exactly as you remember it, but this time you can explore a little more than in the original. For this game, they've brought a level of openness to the Planet Cracker, allowing you to use the tram system to actually go back and forth between areas of the map you've previously explored, and unlock doors for shortcuts, lockers for extra resources, and even complete side quests for more background on certain characters. Basically, everything I had to say about the first game is relevant here, but with the added niceties from Dead Space 2 like Zero Gravity and power nodes. Both Nicole and Isaac have had a slight redesign, but I think it suits their characters a little more. Isaac also has a voice, unlike the first game, but I felt that it was incorporated really well. Everything he had to say felt important and punchy, and he reacted in a very realistic way given the circumstances. This game was so good, in fact, it marks the first time ever that I've done New Game Plus in any video game. And I plan on playing it a 3rd time, eventually too. I could praise this game forever, but it truly is a 10 out of 10 for me. If for whatever reason you haven't played it yet, go out there and do whatever it takes for that to change. Whether you're a fan of the original and you just want to experience it again from a fresh point of view, or if you've never even played a Dead Space game, if you are even slightly interested in the horror genre, you have to pick this one up next time it's in your budget. So there you have it, my rankings for the 5 main Dead Space titles. Every game in this series is worth a play in my opinion. None of them can truly be called a bad game. Whether they're slow and oppressive or fast and gritty, you're in for a fun time no matter what. Don't forget to let me know your thoughts on the series in the comments below and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more rankings like this in the future, and check out my Twitch if you want to catch the gameplays live. Again, it is linked in my bio for you. But until next time, stay safe, have a wonderful time zone, and goodbye!